Every day I switch on my computer and I have a look at YouTube, or indeed at my emails, in which loads of you have been in contact with me and sent me links to various things, and they're all extremely worrying. And people are worried. I get emails of people telling me about the dreadful things in different parts of the country that are going on. Things like the chemtrails and the weather changing. Things like the antibiotics being removed from farmers' use. Things like the digital currencies that are being thrust in our way. The things like the harms that nobody's listening to, thanks to a certain medical procedure that the whole world had to endure. And every day there is more bad news. The thing that I'm concerned about is that people watching mainstream media are being fed one load of old rubbish that the mainstream media are giving us. The government are also pushing out diktats about how things should be done, all for our benefit, by the way, all for our convenience. And behind the scenes, they're doing certain things like consultations that they haven't actually put out publicly, or at least very visibly publicly. They just stuck things onto their website and said, oh, there's a consultation. We're going to be charging you now by the road mile. And so every time you take your car, it's going to be even more expensive. It's a disenfranchisement of the public. All this stuff is there to make you feel grim. And then you go on YouTube, and as I say, there's all these YouTube videos which are equally scary and frightening. And I can see in my comments that many people are saying we're doomed, it's all over, humanity is lost, and things like that, as if they're ready and prepared just to roll over and make it happen. And I think many people feel there is very little they can do. They're worried, they're concerned, but they don't know which way to turn, and they think it's a fait accompli and there's no point even getting out of bed. Well, let me tell you, that's what they want you to think. That's how they want you to feel. Disenfranchised, not worth interacting with, that you feel powerless, resistance is useless. Just lie down and don't worry. Everything will be all right. We'll put you into these 15-minute cities. We'll contain you and we'll lock you down. We'll give you some sort of universal credit. We'll feed you some bland food. Just sit behind the screens and your life will still be okay. We'll take away your house and we'll put you in 16 meters of living space, and that's it. And people do feel, I can see that from the emails that I get, that it's hopeless and that there is no answer. But that's not right. That isn't true. In my opinion, and I'm just saying that this is my opinion, that there is everything to live for and that there is everything to fight for. And it may be that we're going into a battle that we, the people of this land, of the world, can actually win, and that we should feel empowered. I know it's very difficult to feel empowered, but we have, as people, inalienable rights. We are sovereign. We must remember that. We must not believe that they have any power over us. We must rebut their terms and stick up for ourselves. One of the tactics they're doing, of course, and we've seen this so many times, is divide and conquer. They put us among ourselves. So in this country, for example, at the moment, we see a lot of illegal immigrants coming in, and many of them are coming over on rubber boats. They're from different nationalities. Their culture is very different. And the media is selling them as a hostile force in a way, and we're putting them up into hotels and even now in private accommodation. And the reaction from the public, of course, is naturally to be somewhat hostile to these people. Now, I'm not saying that they are completely welcome, because they've come from a legal standpoint. They haven't come in through the legal process. But if you like, what's happening is we're being forced to feel it's them and us. This is not a good stance for humanity, because it's dividing us. Now, we may feel that we should be guarding our borders and that we shouldn't have people coming in and sitting in our hotels or in our communities. And I absolutely get that. And we should be able to stop people coming in. But with the divide and conquer as a method, it's going to divert our attention from much bigger issues that are going on. Excuse me whilst I have a slurp of my coffee, and I'll try not to ramble in this video. It seems to me that a lot of this stuff, and there are very clever people who know what's going on and are working on this behind the scenes, and we need to support them, even though we don't really know what they're doing on our behalf. But we know that what we really need to do is to come together, because they are trying to divide us. We as humanity can conquer what shall we call the evil processes, let's say, that are being put to us. And I've talked about a number of these things in this process where I've been questioning what's going on and what we can do. And people have been very kind and saying, well, Richard, you've put it across in a very measured way. And I think that's very important, that we have to be measured. We don't panic. We don't get angry. We can stay in honour and we can stay reasonable, because that's the only way that the powers who think that they have control over us will listen to us if we are reasonable. We can be firm, absolutely. We can tell them we're not going to move, we're not going to roll over, but we need to be firm. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about in today's video is a report that somebody sent to me about antibiotics for animals. So I was watching a video that somebody sent me, and it was in America, and they said we've got until the 21st of July in America, in which farmers, any farmer, can buy antibiotics for their cattle or their sheep, for their animals, in which they can self-administer to keep those animals in a healthy condition and get rid of disease. They can buy it off the shelf at a reasonable price, and they can look after their animals. Just for the moment, let's just take away the fact that antibiotics in general, doing that as an ordinary everyday thing, is probably not good for animals, because it gets into the meat system and it eventually comes to us, and which in our lifetime we're taking in too many antibiotics through the food chain. But let's just park that for a second, because I'll come back to that argument in a minute. So the fact that the farmers had control of being able to administer the necessary medicines, shall we say, to their cattle and sheep and pigs and hens and chickens and whatever else it is, the fact that that is now going to be taken away, and it means you have to go to a veterinarian, I can never say the proper word, veterinarian, to a veterinarian who will then charge more money, because you're paying for an individual to come and do it at his rate, plus he'll no doubt put a percentage on the actual medicines that he wants to use, and you're beholden to the veterinarian for his advice and his time scale, and him and his team, which is going to make the production of your meat, if you're making meat from the animals, or your dairy, if you're making dairy products from that, more expensive, which means that fewer people are going to be able to afford those products. Now, in my opinion, that seems to be a deliberate policy to reduce the amount of meat and dairy that is available to the people. A product that has been available for thousands of years, for generations, going back to really the early stages of farming, when people were discovering this is a brilliant way to sustain our people, to get certain proteins and to feed people. So that it seems to be a deliberate policy that the governments are doing. And I understand, and correct me if I've got this wrong, that over here in England, that's already been outlawed, that in order to give antibiotics, I think only a couple of years ago, that you have to go to a vet and that they will have to do it. Now, I may have got that wrong, I'm not sure, but somebody can work that out. So in a way, this is another way of divide and rule, isn't it? You're dividing the farmers, that only large scale farmers can afford to have those fees from the vet in order to keep the animals fed, not fed, but the medicine provided for them. So that seems extremely unfair, and it's coming from the government who are saying that we're in charge and we're telling you how you should run your farm. Now, just to address, if I go back to address the antibiotic issue in itself, we have a situation where since the war, farmers have been pushed into industrialized farming. Instead of having farming that was subsistence farming, farming on a small scale with smaller fields, mixed farming, so different types of animals and crops, and having a sustainable farm in which most of the things like fertilizer was coming from the animals that you had in the farm to begin with, and you had thousands of farms across the country, thousands of small scale farms that supplied the villages, the towns and the cities with fresh produce, freshly grown and mostly organic. That's what we used to have, and it worked all right. The animals weren't as big, the farmers didn't have huge numbers of animals, but because they were small scale, they didn't need as much or any until antibiotics were invented. You didn't need so much of those products anyway. You didn't need them because the animals weren't pushed together where disease could move about so very quickly. Whereas in the smaller scale farms and the older farms, you had a much more holistic approach, that the animals, if one animal was a bit diseased, you could separate that from the rest of the herd. It was very easy. You had loads and loads of farms. You had the whole business of people being able to, sons and daughters inheriting a farm, generations of farms would exist, and you had hundreds, and as I say, thousands of wonderful individual farms, some farmers running it not as well as other farmers running it, but you as the member of the public could go and look at the fields, you could see that the farmer was doing great things. Farmers took huge amount of pride in their farm. You would see them during the ploughing, where they would plough with incredibly straight lines. There was a certain pride of seeing the crops looking the very best they could. Well, these days, of course, they've pulled out the hedgerows, the machinery has got bigger and bigger, and the farms have now got monocrops, and people still argue that that you've got to have this monocrop without any weeds, without anything else in between, and that you need the pesticides, the insecticides, the fungicides, the herbicides, all these sort of things on the crop, which of course gets into the food chain sooner or later. So you have these abundance of super crops, of crops that have been manipulated. So a lot of the nutrients are taken out. Now, I personally think that that is the wrong approach. It's been an experiment. We've seen how this food stuff has lost its integrity, and we've seen the adoption of huge swathes of processed foods, which has not been terribly beneficial to the health of the nation. People have become lazy. The convenience of slamming something into a microwave and having effectively 5G waves nuke the food. We've lived like that, and people will say, but Richard, we live longer, but more people have all sorts of different health issues than we've ever had before, and people are popping the pills that Big Pharma want to sell to you. I was talking yesterday in my video where I was looking at the veg box that I'd got with organic food, and saying how, remember, food is a medicine. It's a medicine. It's there to give you all nutrients that you need. It's not just a fuel to make you feel less hungry. It's actually there to do you benefit, to put the right nutrients into your brain so you can think clearly and have more energy put it into your blood so that you get all the nutrients and the vitamins and the minerals that you need as a physical being, as a living man or woman that you need. Healthy food will give you a healthy body and a healthy mind. The industrialization of food has stripped that away. So that, in my opinion, is one of the problems that's been going on rather dramatically. And we've not taken too much notice of the food industry because we've been busy with other things, trying to earn a living for ourselves. We don't work on the land anymore. We're not associated. Farms have disappeared. Farmland has been built on. And in my opinion, that's a gross misuse of the land for growing food. One of the most important things that we ever do, growing food. We've seen how chemicals have been infiltrating all over the place. Fluoride, for example, has been placed into the water. It's a waste product, but it's been sold to us that it's good for bones and teeth for children, which now we're understanding is actually not really true, that actually it's more of a poison and it's not good for us. Go and look it up. Fluoride is not actually as good as we believe it to be. And this sort of whole process of poisoning incrementally the food system with all these different ways is a bad thing. I read a report about an apple farmer who now is unable to farm apples, and so he's having to plough up and chop down all the trees because the whole process of growing food for small producers is getting more and more expensive. And it's becoming more and more industrialized to the point that we no longer know what's on the food in terms of the toxins and things to grow it. And we're being told that things like insects are going to be the answer because we're supposedly trying to save the planet. Again, another big lie that's being pushed down at us, in my opinion, and that it's all being sold to us. So it's very easy to feel frightened and worried that there is no hope. And so the point of this video is to say it's all very well other YouTubers and other platforms scaring us, just as the mainstream media do, scaring us and saying there is no hope, this is what's happening, you should be frightened, but not offering a solution. I'm looking for a solution. I made a video with Justin Walker and William Keat last night, and I'll put a link to it, about the King's Oath and how important it is that the King remains uncompromised because his connection with the WEF and the World Health Organization, who want to mandate how our health policy goes. And I know that there are these treaties that the government is putting forward to say, well, it would be a good idea that there was one world government that could sort out a pandemic, should there be one, rather than country by country, nation by nation, deciding how they want to do. I mean, let's face it, we did see Sweden and we saw the state of Florida in America try a very different system than the one that was adopted by the rest of the world when it came to a vaccine. And in actual fact, we found out that those two countries, well, the state of Florida and Sweden, had very different effects from what the world governments were trying to push down the line. And as we've seen, there have been confusing numbers of excess deaths and, of course, harms by this medical procedure that everybody's had to endure, and the government won't address it. They can't address it. They will not admit that they got it wrong. And it seems to me, in my opinion, that the government is not our government anymore. They're being held almost to ransom, if you like, by the people like the WEF and the World Health Organization, who are unelected. We didn't ask for them. We haven't asked them to govern us, and yet they're pushing their diktats down. So it seems to me that there is a tyrannical government in place, and they're trying to shore up that they are, in fact, for the people, and they're trying to make out it is beneficial for us. in many different ways, and one of them is the lie, of course, that we're trying to save the planet and these are necessary. The net zero is necessary, but of course net zero, as most people are slowly coming to terms with and are waking up, is actually a complete farce, because they're trying to remove cars completely. They're trying to remove our ability to move about and our ability to do anything. They're giving us surveillance left, right and centre by monitoring us. They want us to have digital IDs so that there is a zero trust. They no longer trust us. Now, I'm interested in finding the solutions to this, not scaring people and saying there is no hope, we cannot do anything, let's roll over. And so that, to those people in the comments who write comments such as, we're doomed, it's too late, either you are potentially working for the other side because you're giving up. Don't give up. You cannot give up. You mustn't give up. We must remember that we, the people, are sovereign. The nation might want to be selling our sovereignty out, but they can't. They have not had our consent. This is so vitally important, and this is something that we need to talk about publicly. We need to tell our children, we need to tell the authorities, we need to tell each other on every public platform that we can find, that the government do not have our consent to sell or have a treaty in which they sign away our sovereignty, because that can only be null and void if we do not give the consent. We have not had proper consultations for all the things. So if we have lost the ability to look after our animals, if we've lost the ability to save our farmland, if we have lost the ability to have an identity that we want to keep, if we've lost the ability to not be monitored by cameras, to have face recognition technology thrust upon us here, there and everywhere, if we do not want net zero, if we want to retain our rights to have a classic car or a vintage car or even a modern day petrol car, that we want proper petrol and diesel that will not wreck our vehicles, that we don't necessarily want electric vehicles, we can if we choose to, but the choice has to be ours as people. It has to be. We must remind the government and the people in power that we are those in charge. We have inalienable rights, that the government are our trustees. We are the executors of our life. We are the ones who are in charge, and we are the sole beneficiaries of our life. We must remember this. We must work this out for ourselves. We must stand up and say, no, you are our trustees. We pay the taxes, which means that we are in charge. We are in charge. We pay the money that puts you there. You cannot tell us to do things that we have not asked for. You cannot push these things down our throat. You can't. You may think that you have the UK sovereignty and you can do carte blanche, whatever you like, but you can't. We have the Magna Carta that says that we, the people, are sovereign. And there's nothing you can do with all your statutes and stuff that actually will usurp that. It's impossible. There is more of us people than there are of you. And by the very fact that you need us to vote you in, and this is important, the very fact that you require us to vote you in, it is them admitting that they are the trustee, that they need our consent. And so we either do not vote them in, so they cannot exist. They are a fiction. They are a fiction. They are actors playing out a fiction that we give them the legitimacy. This is where it is so powerful. We think that we're doomed, that we have to tolerate this, that we have the WEF and the Klaus Schwab telling us what we've got. We've got Bill Gates buying up the land and saying this is how you're going to live your lives. No. But we the people have to know this. We cannot just sit there and go, oh, it's a fait accompli, whatever. Well, it might be for you as an individual, but for the rest of us, no, it's not. We have inalienable rights. We are sovereign. We don't have to do this. So what can we do? We must, as I say, we must tell everybody. We must write to our MPs and say to them, no, we don't want this. If you're an MP, imagine you're sitting there as an MP, a member of Parliament, and you get 600 letters through your door. You get 1,000 emails a day, every day, from people saying, just to remind you, we pay your taxes. We have put you where you are. If you don't want to be there, don't worry, we can move you away because we are sovereign. We must remind these people, don't assume that they own us. They are our servants. It is that simple. But we have been indoctrinated to think that they have the power. They don't. This is the point. They don't have the power. They only have the power if we give it to them. Well, I don't give them my power. I don't give them the power. So rebut it. Say no. Tell your friends. Tell everyone. Get the conversation in the public. If, for example, the government are sitting there and they go online and they see that the national conversation is that the people have sovereignty, that the people have inalienable rights, that the people consider and know that they are in charge, it will turn the tables round. They will suddenly begin to quake. They will shudder. They will know that the small number of them have no power because they need our consent. We do not acquiesce. We don't give it to them. Not if they're not going to do as we tell them. We must tell everybody this. This must be the national conversation. If you want to save yourselves, if you do not want crap food, if you do not want to lose the right to have meat, whether you're vegetarian or not, the right to look after our animals in a more respectable way, if you do want to have the right to retain your individual freedoms, if you wish to not give away your personal data to all and sundry, if you don't want a central bank digital currency, if you want to retain the ability to be able to journey, to conveyance yourself from pillar to post at will without being stopped, without being monitored, we, the people, have the power. We just have to remind them en masse, and if they won't listen, then we stay firm, peacefully, honourably. We don't get angry. We don't clench our fists. We don't need to chant. We don't need to swear at them. That way they win. We stay firm and we are peaceful. Our power is in our numbers. There are more of us than there are of them. We must do this. We must tell them, remind them. It's a gentle, a very polite reminder that we are sovereign.